What is the proof that there is more?
There should be proof that there isn't more, because we don't have an explanatorily satisfying account of the world.
Dr. Bernardo Kastrup is a renowned philosopher and prolific author whose groundbreaking work challenges how we understand consciousness and the nature of reality. His tech background in AI and innovation bridges his rigorous scientific insight with deep philosophical inquiry.
We are changing all the time. There isn't a single atom in the body of my 5-year-old self that has stayed in my body. Everything about that 5-year-old has changed. And yet I have the clear sense that I was him. You take aggressive cancer cells, cancer takes hold and multiplies. There is a bioelectrical field that seems to coordinate morphogenesis, coordinate how cells grow, a field that seems to give the body a cue about the body plan. If you control the biochemical field that surrounds the cells, lo and behold, the cancer doesn't grow. We are the first animals that have disconnected from the supercomputer of natural instinct. We don't trust it anymore. We don't listen to it. We replace it with our own stories, our own narratives. We live now profoundly unnatural lives. What was the last time you looked up to the sky at night and saw the stars? The greatest threat to a human being is the loss of meaning. When you deny transcendence, you are robbed of the source of meaning that has given meaning to every generation of humans before you. And now many of us deny that, so they lose their key source of meaning, so they have to compensate to another source of meaning. Consciousness is immanent in everything. The stars, the quasars, the galaxies, the black holes and supernovae, they are like your smile. They are physical configurations that betray the presence of an inner psychological subjective state. So what is death? Think of it as what happens when you wake up from a dream. Why are you dreaming? Your mental inner life, it's constrained by the circumstances of the dream. When that dissociative state ends because you woke up, now you know much more. You went back to a much broader state of mind.
I can't explain it. Unbelievable. Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
Welcome to our breakdown. What if we were to tell you that we have an episode today that breaks down and covers nearly every aspect of the exploration that Jonathan and I started this podcast in order to discover? What's the nature of reality? What is our role in the universe? What happens when we die? How do we explain things that are outside of a materialistic framework? Does it matter if you find love? What's the purpose of suffering? Is there any pain too great to overcome? Why are we here, and what does it mean?
You may think this is highly metaphysical and philosophical, and while it is, it has very intense practical applications to how our bodies function, how the mind influences us, whether or not placebo can be used to decrease pain, reduce surgery, and even overcome very intense real physiological issues such as a cancer diagnosis.
We're going to be speaking with Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. He is a Dutch philosopher. He has a PhD in computer engineering, worked in the high-tech industry for almost 30 years, but he also holds a PhD in philosophy. He's part of a branch of philosophy that falls under analytic idealism. But what we discovered is that there is an incredibly rich, deep, nuanced, and very creative way that Dr. Kastrup has for understanding the nature of our reality, the purpose of why we're here, and literally how to apply these principles to a life well lived. Dr. Kastrup, who goes by Bernardo, as he asked us to call him, is the executive director of Essentia Foundation, and he's the founder and CEO at AI systems company Euclid B.V. We're going to be discussing the diamond and the soul of the West, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about kind of all of the things that make us able to function in a world that is so complicated, so enormous, and the notion that we can understand the smallest things and apply them to the biggest things is running through the thread of this entire conversation. We cannot wait for you to hear this.
This interview is unlike any that he has given before. He actually came out of semi-retirement from interviews in order to do this one. We are excited to share it. If you haven't already checked out Mayim Bialik's breakdown on Substack, we have a growing breaker community there, and we release content exclusively there that is not released anywhere else. Check us out.
This is, we think, one of the most personal interviews that Bernardo has ever done, and he really doesn't do interviews anymore, but we're so grateful that he opens up about suicide, which he talks about in his book, and some of his struggles with a variety of complex issues surrounding that. So we hope that you get a lot out of this episode. We certainly got so much from talking to Bernardo. And yeah, let's welcome Bernardo Kastrup to the breakdown. Break it down.
Thanks for having me.
We often have a lot of clarity about what we're going to talk to people about. And then sometimes we do research and we learn about someone like you. And I literally say to Jonathan, I could talk to him about everything and I don't know where to start.
Okay, let's do that.
So we'd love to get to as much as we can. I do want to start by saying I read this book of yours, and you've written a lot of books.
Oh, I am surprised you read this one. I thought you would go to the hardcore philosophy stuff.
You know what, Dr. Kastrup, I'm a very surprising person.
Please call me Bernardo. This doctor thing,
We did a lot of research on a lot of the different fields, but I really want to make sure that we get to this. So I'm just going to flag right up at the top that I'm a huge fan of Peter Kingsley, and I'm a huge fan of Brian Muraresku. And I found all of these beautiful and profound and, you know, in many cases, very kind of upsetting, right? Intellectually upsetting threads throughout the whole book. So we think that a simpler place to start, and I'm putting simpler in air quotes, is what is reality?
it is this, right? Whatever this is. It's not like we are not acquainted with reality. We came out of it. We live in it like fish in water. We live and breathe it all the time. We are very, very intimately acquainted with reality. The problem is when we ask ourselves the question, what is reality? And then we want to sort of capture that in some nice, neat conceptual framework, hopefully without contradicting ourselves in the process. And that's what is difficult.
There are many different versions of reality that we can interface with. One of my father's, favorite quotes was "La vida es sueño." Life is a dream. And in the religious tradition and the mystical tradition that my people come from, this is a projection, as if something's being projected on a screen. The Matrix movies came closest to kind of articulating what many of us have as our mystical legacy, right, over thousands of years. I wonder, can you give us a little bit of framework of why it's important to consider that what we see and what we touch and what we taste and what we smell is not the entirety of our actual experience?
Well, first of all, because it is a virtual certainty that it's not, right? There is no way a monkey would have evolved a cognitive system and a perceptual apparatus to pick out everything that is philosophically salient about reality. There is just no way that would happen. So this can't be everything. And the ones who maintain that it is have the burden of argument and perhaps proof, but at least argument. Our conception of what this is, especially if we understand this to be all or a sliver of reality, it modulates our sense of meaning, our sense of purpose, the way we relate to ourselves, to other people, to animals and nature at large, the way we relate to past and future, very important. And therefore, it modulates how we live life and what we make of it. People who say we don't need metaphysics, it's a waste of time. Well, they say that because they are assuming thoughtlessly a sort of default metaphysics. And they say that they don't have a metaphysics. Well, in fact, they do. They are just not self-reflective enough to explore their own minds and their own hidden assumptions and their own dispositions to see what it is. But the metaphysics is critical to live life. It's the narrative in terms of which we relate to self, to others, and to the world.
What would be the proof that there is more, right? Because if I go about my life and I go about the world and I'm interacting with things and I don't know, I wake up, I make breakfast, I take my kid to the bus. What is the proof that there is more? Why should I believe that there is more?
There should be proof that there isn't more, because the zero hypothesis here is that the cognitive apparatus of a monkey doesn't pick out everything that is out there, right? Evolutionarily speaking, that's the null hypothesis. But I will entertain it. There are lots of indications, very strong indications. I hesitate using the word proof, because proof is something that mathematicians do. Usually science and philosophy, we don't deal with proofs. We deal with what is the best hypothesis at hand. The indications are, for instance, from certain experiments in foundations of physics that show that some basic assumptions we make about reality, like physical entities have standalone existence, don't seem to hold when you put a big enough microscope and you magnify reality to a point where you can really see the details. And when you look at reality at that level of detail, those assumptions break. Physical things don't seem to have standalone existence. You can only say that they exist if you make a measurement. If you're not making a measurement, you can't say that they exist. In the neuroscience of consciousness, we have no account of how seemingly unconscious material stuff arranges itself in such a way as to give rise to the qualities of experience. There is a gargantuan gap between the two. I'll limit my answer to these two fields. I could go on, but these two fields very compellingly tell us that our little narratives of completeness, they don't hold. There is more going on than we think, because we don't have an explanatorily satisfying account of the world.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Thrive Cosmetics.
You know, the transition from summer to fall is a very special time in my house. It's when cozy baking season begins, and the delightful spiced scents of cookies and pastries are a simple, intentional way to make home feel like a cozy sanctuary. Small traditions that mark the changing of the season feel good, and that includes updating your look. From a simple, just gotta get out the door routine to festive fall glam, Thrive Cosmetics is your go-to for completing any fall look. Every product is 100% vegan, cruelty-free, made with clean, skin-loving ingredients that work with your skin, not against it. I love that Thrive Cosmetics gives back to a ton of causes that are important to so many of us. With over $150 million in product and cash donations to 600 plus giving partners, your purchase directly fuels real impact, and that's beauty with purpose. One of my favorite products is their Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara. People always say, "What are you wearing on your lashes?" Well, that's what it is. It's a vegan tubing mascara with over 40,000 five-star reviews. It's sweat-proof, which is very important, and there's 6 shades that last all day without clumping, smudging, or flaking, and it's easy to remove, slides right off with warm water without yanking out your natural lashes. Complete your fall look. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/MBB for an exclusive offer of 20% off your first order.
That's Thrive Cosmetics.
CAUSEMETICS.com/MBB. As many of you know, I love my cats really more than most things in this world. I would do anything to keep them as happy and healthy as possible.
We have a quick message from today's sponsor, the ASPCA Pet Health Insurance Program.
Your pet's part of the family, and you would do anything for them, right? But those vet bills, whew, those can really add up. That's why it's worth checking out ASPCA Pet Health Insurance. Pet insurance can help manage the vet bills so you can focus on what really matters, making sure your pet gets the care that they need when they need it. And there's a perk for enrolling. When you enroll in an ASPCA Pet Health Insurance plan, you could get a $25 Amazon gift card. It's a little treat for you while doing something great for your pet. The program offers customizable accident and illness plans, making it easier to get your pet the care that they may need. It's been around for almost 20 years, and they've covered nearly 1 million pets in that time. You can tailor your plan to fit your budget, your lifestyle, and your pet's particular quirks, because big vet bills never show up when it's convenient, do they? To explore coverage, visit aspcapetinsurance.com/break. That's aspcapetinsurance.com/break. Eligibility restrictions apply. Visit aspcapetinsurance.com/Amazon terms for more info. There are many people who would say that a lot of this kind of mental exploration of the nature of reality, especially when we introduce notions of like, oh, quantum physics, right? There are many who would say that this is a form of mental masturbation. The only explanation is the materialist explanation. And anything beyond that is, either the purview of, religion, right? And religious structures that actually reflect more about humans than about God, if you ask me. Or, they're the musings of a manufactured and mystical thought experiment. And I wonder if you can sort of speak to that. We speak to all sorts of people who believe in psi phenomenon. We speak to all sorts of doctors, surgeons, people who are theoretical physicists who want to understand a larger nature of reality and who believe that even the foundations of how we articulate quantum mechanics is based on a foundation that acknowledged there is something irrational here, right? Using that playfully, right? So what would be the way to sort of approach this from an intellectually rigorous and forgiving perspective? And it's very easy to say, oh, that's all, nonsense, and that's for the crazy religious people. But that's not the conversation we're having. I wonder if you can help us remember that we're not crazy to delve into this world.
Well, let me first acknowledge there is a lot of mental masturbation in philosophy, even in science. In science, it's called p-value engineering. A lot of mental masturbation going on in there. And there's a lot of it in philosophy as well. There are whole fields of philosophy that are mental masturbation. Metaphysics is not one of them. And the only way for one to hold the opinion that materialism has accounted for everything and therefore anything else is a waste of time, the only way to hold that position is to be vastly misinformed of the issues. Not even those who defend physicalism in academia would say that it's a done deal. Actually, they are on the defense right now. It's very hard to find a physicalist philosopher today willing to go on stage and actively defend physicalism. It has become very hard. So physicalism does not provide us an account of a great many things. It doesn't give us an account of experience. Any experience, the taste of a chocolate cake, a bellyache, falling in love, seeing the stars in the night sky, none of it has a physicalist account. Physicalism, when applied to foundations of physics, doesn't give us a causally closed picture of the world because we cannot predict the outcome of any single quantum event. We can predict the statistical distribution of many, many outcomes taken together, but we cannot predict any single one. And there are a great many things in nature that depend on the outcome of a single quantum event, perhaps even our thoughts. Materialism does not give us a metaphysically tenable, let alone satisfying, of what's going on. And this is largely acknowledged in philosophy and in science today, even physics and neuroscience. So those who think that physicalism does or materialism does give us a complete account, frankly, they just don't know what they're talking about.
Is that what we should tell people? You just don't know what you're talking about.
But they're so sure of themselves. We spoke to someone recently who is a staunch physicalist and just is like, there's no such thing, there's no credibility, there's no data, there's no evidence. All the studies that you think you've seen, you haven't seen, people misremember. They come at it with such fervor that it's you need a repository of ammunition to fight back against.
We need Bernardo. We need him sitting right next to me all the time.
I was thinking, invite them to have a live debate with me.
We'll stand behind you with boxing gloves like this. Like, you tell him, Bernardo. Tell him.
But look, the attitude you describe is not new. You see that in religious people, fundamentalist religious people.
This is exactly what I said. I said we were speaking to a secular professor of psychology who sounded more fanatical about me being wrong than I, as a person of faith, am about being right. He was more certain. And I said, who's the fanatic here?
Usually this betrays a lot of insecurity about the position they hold. It's important to live the position that this is a settled question, because if you acknowledge that it's not, many insecurities come to the forefront. It's very, look, I say this not as a criticism, but as a human being who suffers as well. And I'm not going to say that I would never fall on that trap, because I just may. But this is psychology. It's not metaphysics. It's not science. We are talking about a psychological issue here.
Jeffrey Kripal is a friend of the podcast, and we love him.
I love him too.
One of the things that Jeffrey taught us is that the notion that someone's experience, no matter how fantastical, how out there, how unbelievable, how impossible it seems, is in some ways a portal, right? Either to someone's particular experience or to a larger experience that we're all having. Where is that line between delusion, between madness, and between an open understanding of what could possibly be aspects of the human experience that may not be easily verifiable, quantifiable, or able to hold up to the stringency that, again, mathematicians would have?
It is not an easy line to find. I mean, the scientific method offers us some tools to use, some best practices, even some pre-engineered value judgments, let's put it that way. It is not infallible. I'll give you an example. The scientific method presupposes that we can isolate all the circumstances, all the variables that matter to an experiment within a laboratory setting. So you're only allowing the variables to play a causal role in what you're experimenting with, the variables that you know. Everything else you controlled for or eliminated. And then it expects that it can trigger any phenomenon under those controlled conditions in a laboratory. Well, that is an incredibly constraining assumption that presupposes that all causal influences in reality operate at a microscopic level, because you can only isolate things in the confines of a small laboratory if the causal chains here are only microscopic and operate locally. But many of the stuff people call psi, I would imagine that they are only triggered under circumstances that evoke one's emotional reaction. And you can't have that in a laboratory setting. Or you could have natural causal chains that operate only over large distances at the level of families or societies or cultures, all of which is beforehand eliminated by this notion that you should be able to see everything under laboratory settings. Why? Why should reality conform to our experimental convenience? Reality is what it is. If we can't trigger a phenomenon in a laboratory, it doesn't mean that the phenomenon doesn't exist. It only means that it's very hard to study. We have to use observational science as opposed to experimental science. And there is nothing non-scientific about it. Astronomy is an observational science. You can't trigger a black hole in a laboratory or a quasar. You are limited to watching it with care.
The notion that if something exists, that it has to or can exist that way every time and for every person is absurd. It's the equivalent of saying, I've had great sex before, and so I assume I will have great sex with every single person I have sex with. That's like, it doesn't work like that. You could put me in an appropriate setting that is just like the setting I had, and I will not have an orgasm, I promise, right? Because it is dependent on the mood I'm in, what I saw on Instagram that morning, who the president has censored, what's going on in global politics, and hormone fluctuations and things that do not travel. I mean, if you want to question science, be a woman in perimenopause, There's no chart. All those charts, this is your luteal phase. When you get to like 40, it's like, fuck it. That's what it's like to try and recreate something in the lab.
This is the first conversation about consciousness that has gone to menopausal sex.
Oh, then we are not having enough conversations. That's a major event in consciousness, I suppose. No! I'm totally with you there. People who think like that, and I'm not saying this to put people down, but they are not serious participants in the discussion. And it's perfectly okay to be like that. I'm not a serious participant in a discussion about art. What is not okay is to not be a serious one, but think you are and act accordingly. That's a kind of intellectual arrogance that backfires spectacularly because one just makes a fool of oneself. People make a lot of metaphysical assumptions in the process of denying metaphysics. This happens all the time. And it happens even in language. For instance, when people say, can consciousness exist outside the body? What is the assumption they are making? Dualism. There is the body and there is consciousness. Well, it's not the only option. It could be that the body is a construct in consciousness, and therefore consciousness is not in the body. It's the body that is in consciousness. And then you say that and people go like, oh, let me think about that. Well, there's a menu of hypotheses that are internally consistent, perfectly coherent, but which requires a little thoughtfulness and not knee-jerk metaphysical reactions based on assumptions one doesn't even know one is making. And that's why often these people are not serious participants in the discussion. They don't even know what assumptions they're making.
You find ways to use words where I'm like, I think I know how to say this. I think I know what it is, but let's just be sure. Talk to us about what Cosmopsychism is.
So our current mainstream metaphysics says that the world is physical and that consciousness is a sort of a secondary or an epiphenomenal construct of certain material arrangements like brains. And therefore consciousness only exists within brains. Another hypothesis is that consciousness is everywhere and that particular material arrangements simply reflect or betray the presence of certain states of consciousness or arrangements of consciousness. So my brain betrays the presence of a human arrangement of consciousness. But consciousness is primary. It's spread throughout the universe. So that's what is Cosmopsychism. There are many variations of it.
What do you mean that consciousness is separate from what I'm experiencing right now in my head, in this body, in this chair, looking at a screen?
I'm precisely saying that it's not separate, that it's intrinsic to your body, but since your body is made of the same kinds of atoms and fields as the rest of the universe, then it's intrinsic to the entire universe. So consciousness is everywhere, which doesn't mean that everything is conscious in and of itself. A single neuron in my head doesn't have its own inner chatter, talking to its neural neighbors. There is only something it is like to be me, not something it is like to be a single neuron in my head. By the same token, there may be nothing it is like to be this bottle of water right now. And that doesn't contradict the hypothesis that consciousness is everywhere. Just as it correlates with the whole of my brain, including every neuron, it may correlate with the entirety of the physical universe. And that does not mean that everything is consciousness. It only means that consciousness underlies or is immanent in everything.
What this leads to is, if the body is a part of a larger consciousness, is the mirrored systems that we're interacting with all throughout our existence that are actually just mirrored reflections of different forms of consciousness. Meaning that if the body is a reflection of some larger system, what am I connected to? How do I operate? How does that change what I understand my physical reality to be?
When you look in the mirror, you see a physical body that you can describe, you can delineate its boundaries, you can say, there it is, there is a physical body there. But you know from direct experience that behind that physical body you see in the mirror, there is the entire inner life of Jonathan, an entire universe of subjectivity, of inner experience behind that image or underlying that image, there is the entire subjective inner life of a person, of the person who is looking.
And one of the best examples of that is when you were 5 years old, you were looking in the mirror at a completely different body. It was much smaller. It had a completely different experience, but you did not have a problem when you turned 6 being like, who the fuck is that in the mirror? You were like, 5-year-old me is now 6, and then I'm 20, and one day I'll be, God willing, 120, right? That's the you inside. That's the observing mind, correct?
We have no problem in understanding that behind that image in the mirror, there is the entire subjective universe of me. Cosmopsychism would say the same applies to the entire universe. Behind the physical universe, there is the inner life of the universe, which presents itself to us in the form of physical arrangements, just as my inner life presents itself to you in the form of the physical arrangements we call my body. My words, my smile, my facial expressions, those betray the presence of my inner life. If I cry, you will say, he is sad. So material arrangements, physical configurations correlate with inner mental states. We know that for people. Panpsychism would say, now do the same thing for the entirety of the universe. There is a universal mind that underlies all the physical universe, and the configurations of the physical universe, the stars, the quasars, the galaxies, the black holes, and supernovae, they are like your smile. They are physical configurations that betray the presence of an inner psychological subjective state. And look how beautiful this is, because it eliminates all arbitrary differentiations in nature. In all cases, material arrangements, physical configurations, are the extrinsic appearance of inner mental states. That holds for your brain, and it holds for everything else that is made of the same kinds of atoms and force fields as your brain. There is no arbitrary discontinuity in nature. Matter is always the external appearance of inner experience under Cosmopsychism.
That's staggeringly beautiful. You and your consciousness, right? Your conscious experience, you have the ability to be enamored with the fact that you even have the ability to think, to experience. You are, one with nature is like putting it mildly. And what it sounds a lot like from Jonathan and my experience here, talking to people from all different backgrounds and perspectives, is this is very, very similar to a unifying and loving understanding that many indigenous communities have, that many of the early Greeks experienced, right? This is also something that people touch in transcendental states, often with the use of psychedelics or other, highly, highly focused meditative practices. We had, Thomas Campbell on, and, I joked that he accidentally proved God, through an understanding of energetic fields and consciousness. And, he accidentally proved that there is something that wants less chaos for us, right? Even as the universe is tending towards chaos.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by MSI United States.
MSI Reproductive Choices is doing absolutely incredible work all around the world. In 2024 alone, MSI helped 21.5 million people access reproductive health care, from contraceptive and safe abortion to maternal care and cancer screenings. Here's what really struck me. 1 in 5 of their clients were under 20. That is millions of young people getting the tools to make informed decisions about their futures. And get this, without MSI, pregnancy-related deaths in the countries they serve would be 15% higher. That's a real impact, real lives saved. And they also trained over 12,000 healthcare workers and supported over 8 million people through local health systems that they helped strengthen. This organization is donor funded. They get no help from the US government, so they are asking for support and they need our help. It's incredibly inexpensive to have a huge impact. $6.50 per year of contraception is incredibly transformative. You can help girls stay in school, help women stay employed, and help them live healthier lives. With $65, you can give 10 women contraception for a year. To give, text my first name, Mayim, to 511-511. Text MAYIM to 511-511 or go online to msiunitedstates.org to learn more or to give. That's M as in modern, S as in safe, I as in informed. msiunitedstates.org. How many women will you help? Please give generously. Text Mayim to 511-511 today. Text fees may apply.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Calm.
If your sleep schedule's been all over the place recently, you're not alone. The shift into fall routines can be the perfect time to reset your nights, starting with Calm. Calm helps with the big three: anxiety, stress, and sleep problems. Calm's meditations help untangle the day's chaos in my brain, and breath has a direct link to anxiety and regulating anxiety. I feel more at ease and in my body after so many of their easy and helpful breathing exercises. I've tried them all. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. They offer a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate life's ups and downs. Guided meditations to help you work through anxiety and stress, boost your focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Sleep stories, sleep meditations, and calming music help you drift off to restful sleep quickly and naturally. Grounding exercises. Jonathan loves to say, do a grounding exercise if you're feeling overwhelmed. There's also expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, improve relationships, and more. The Calm app puts the tools you need right in your pocket, so stress and anxiety relief is always within reach. They've got over 2 million 5-star reviews and can help you stress less, sleep more, and live better.
Calm has an exclusive offer just for our listeners. Get 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/break.
This is an amazing value. Go to calm.com/break for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. Calm.com/break. Tell Calm you heard about them from us.
I wonder if you could extrapolate the idea that matter is always a reflection of an inner experience to the structure of society, political discord, fractions in social bonds. Can we take it not only to the Milky Way and the existence of the stars, but actually to the structure of what we're seeing in society and interpolitics, in international politics?
The first thing to notice is that a direct implication of this notion that matter is always, in all cases, the extrinsic appearance of subjective states is that the world now is of the same kind as us. We are no longer this rare accidents in which a world that is fundamentally unconscious temporarily became conscious. Behind everything you see around you, there is something of the same nature as you. So now you belonging here. You are not an accident, a temporary epiphenomenal aberration. The world now is of the same nature as you. You have an inner life. So has the world. That's the first thing. Now, the next thing to understand is that what we identify with, and that's your point earlier, what we tend to identify with is a particular narrative of self. Could say, well, I am Bernardo, I am a philosopher, I live with Claudia, I also happen to do computer stuff, and I love to watch The Big Bang Theory, and I go to work at the high-tech campus, and this whole narrative of self, and we say, it's me. But if we follow this narrative over time, we realize that we are changing all the time. My 5-year-old self had different thoughts, different opinions, different perspectives, a completely different body. There isn't a single body, a single atom in the body of that 5-year-old that has stayed in my body until today. Many have left and returned. There are atoms that were once in the lungs of Napoleon, in my lungs, at some point in my life, but it has never stayed static. Everything about that 5-year-old has changed. And yet, I have the clear sense that I was him, even though everything else changed. Now, you can extrapolate very easily now, and you can easily imagine that by the same token that you believe you were your 5-year-old self, on the same logical grounds, you must then believe that you are me. I am like your 5-year-old self. I'm completely different from you, but the core subjectivity in me is identical to the core subjectivity in you. If we were to both be in a perfect sensory deprivation chamber and become completely amnesic for 30 seconds, during those 30 seconds, you and I would be completely identical. Not two identical units of the same model, but effectively the same model, because you cannot talk about spatial or temporal distinctions in a state of complete mental emptiness. Not only is there subjective inner life behind everything you see around you, now you can even identify with everything else and everybody else, because distinctions are as significant to identity, distinctions between people are as significant to identity as the distinctions between you and your 5-year-old self. Those distinctions don't stop you from saying, I was my 5-year-old self. So if you are to be logically consistent and rigorous in this line of thought, you must also acknowledge, I may just as well be Jonathan.
I know that philosophers don't get to decide world politics, but this is one of the best and most compelling arguments for an understanding across political divides of our shared humanity on this planet. Meaning, this is potentially the most love-filled perspective on our existence, which would then lead you to say, what is a border, right? Who are those people versus these people? And, I don't think it has to be a political conversation because it's a consciousness conversation. And, there's this mystical concept that in order for us to live on this planet, we have to be able to block out a certain amount of pain and suffering so that we can just walk around, go to the bathroom, raise children. That if we were awakened to the true suffering, right, that exists as the human condition, no one would be able to exist, right? So the notion is that being human is about this balance of being able to say, where do I end? Where do you begin? And is there a way to introduce that into a conversation about belonging and justice, right?
Absolutely. Look, I don't think these notions, these philosophical ideas, mean that we should all hold hands and sing the Kumbaya. I tend not to be a romantic philosopher, and I'll tell you why. If I could go back in time and watch my 10-year-old self throwing a fit and being nasty and destructive, I wouldn't go to him and say, come here, my darling, give me a hug. No, I would say, this is not fine. And you would set boundaries, and you would set a stake on the ground and say, until here and no more. Even though it is your 10-year-old self, you would still do that. So I think it's perfectly valid for there to be disagreement, for there to be robust discussions. It's perfectly valid for there to be criticism. There is nothing in me that cannot criticize what's going on in Ukraine and Gaza right now. There is no way I'm going to hold hands with certain people involved and sing the Kumbaya. But what it also means, ultimately, this philosophical idea, is the recognition that what is behind their eyes is what is behind your eyes. So there is a chance for reconciliation. It is not romantic reconciliation of singing the Kumbaya and giving 3 kisses. It's a more mature, sober reconciliation. It's the notion that there isn't a fundamental chasm that cannot be crossed. No, these chasms do not exist. You can always cross.
We can't avoid what is happening. When I see what's happening in Sudan, and I say, if everyone could see what is happening, it would collectively break the heart of the world. And I want to believe that it would then lead to a different conversation. And yet we're human and we have to live, kind of this human experience. There's one more thing that I wanted you to talk about in terms of the universe has this sort of network capability of a brain, right? And the first kind of environmental level that many of us think of this sort of microcosm on is to say like, oh, the world is, kind of, it's an expression of the human experience, and the trees are the lungs, and this is and the streams are the circulatory system, but if we expand that out, to the size of the universe and beyond, meaning beyond what we can even encapsulate, can you talk like in a way that maybe can help people understand what it means to say that the universe is kind of mimicking the network that is a brain, and the brain itself then is made up of all of these separate networks, and that each cell, as Bruce Lipton talked about with us in a very different way, that each cell has that kind of capacity for memory, for consciousness, which recently Essentia Foundation talked about. Can you give us a little bit of a fractal understanding?
Under this idealist or cosmopsychist notion that matter is the outer appearance of inner experience, not what creates inner experience, but just what experience looks like from the outside. If you interpret this rigorously, then we will realize that the brain and its network structure, which has a certain network topology that can be quantified, the brain is the outer appearance of our inner life, of our subjective experience from within. So if the universe has a subjective inner life as well, at the largest cosmic scale, you could say, well, it's plausible that we should find a network structure that, once quantified, would resemble that of a brain, because they are both representing the same phenomenon at different scales. It's like the fractal you alluded to, as above, so below. So it's a brain at our level, but something resembling a brain, that's a valid hypothesis, if cosmopsychism is correct, something resembling or having some of the features of the network topology of the brain should be found at the largest scales that we can discern. Lo and behold, that's exactly what we find. So what Franco and Alberto did, they did a spatial Fourier transform of the distribution of matter, including dark matter, in the universe at its largest scales as simulated by the best models we have today, the standard model of cosmology. And the result of that spatial Fourier transform shows a pattern of distribution of matter that is very, very much like what you find in a brain. The network topologies are very similar. It's not vaguely similar, it's quantifiably similar to a disconcerting level that nothing in physics would allow us to explain.
Can you talk a little bit about what it specifically means to say that we see the topology of the kind of network that we call brain in the larger universe?
So if you simulate the universe at its largest scales, you have to simulate because you cannot take a telescope and figure out that structure since you are within it, right? So we have to use our mathematics to simulate it. Matter is not distributed uniformly across the universe, including dark matter. It forms these filaments and these areas of concentration, and different areas of concentration of matter connect together through these filaments of material distribution. You can look at the topology of the network that is formed that way, the galaxies, galaxy clusters, and the way they connect through these filaments of normal matter and dark matter. You can look at the topology of that and compare that to how neurons connect to each other in a mammalian brain. So you would have the accumulation of matter that is the neuron body, and the filaments would be the axon and the dendrites that connect each neuron to the other neurons. And then you do a mathematical quantification of that network topology in both cases, and you compare the numbers, and the numbers match surprisingly well in a way that is difficult to say, well, it's just an accident. Now, look, this doesn't mean the universe is a brain, because we define the word brain to, biological organisms on this particular rock, the third rock from the sun. And functionally, it also cannot possibly work very much like the brain, because the distances involved at the largest scales of the universe, given the speed of light limit, would mean that the universe cannot form what integrated information theory calls these reentrant loops of information integration. It's physically impossible, based on what we know today, for the universe to form those reentrant loops. So you could infer that, okay, the universe cannot be self-reflective because there isn't just time since the beginning of the universe, and given the rate of expansion and the speed of light limit, for these reentrant loops that are required for self-reflection to form. But it can very much be a brain like an instinctive brain, the brain of a nematode, that also doesn't form very many reentrant loops. But the suggestion is that something in the very fabric of reality, in the basic organizing principles of reality, manifests itself. These organizing principles manifest themselves at one scale as brains, mammalian brains, and at another scale, the very same organizing principles manifest as the network topology of the web of galaxies.
I think many of us think that just like the universe is like if you take a pile of confetti and you like throw it up in the air and wherever it lands, that's the universe. But what we're saying is that there's density, right? There's density and collections for gravitational reasons, for all sorts of fascinating reasons beyond my pay grade. But to say that there is some sort of order like that, you know, for me, and I'm often asked as a person of faith, like, how do you believe in science? And in my opinion, anyone who has studied neuroembryology and sees how you go from one sperm and one egg, and when they meet, it forms a blastula, and you get an implantation that leads to a folding in. The way I described it to my students when I taught nurse, it's like a hot dog in a bun. You look like a hot dog in a bun, and then something incredible happens and the hot dog folds, and all of a sudden you see a forebrain, and you see a midbrain, and you see a hindbrain. That is the holiest, most divine thing I have ever tried to understand. And to me, that's kind of what we're talking about. If I think about that on a galaxy level, right? We have nonsense. We have tohu vavohu, we say in Hebrew. You know, we have a nothingness that becomes a somethingness.
It also then speaks to if there's a level of intelligence with intent for the structure of the earth and the people on the earth. Materialists say everything, there's no intelligent force in the universe. Everything is random. Nothing cares about us. And of course, the religious fanatics will say, go so far as to say that we should follow this dogma. Where does understanding that there can be a brain of the universe, for oversimplistically repeating, where does that take us to understand if this force has our highest good in mind, or some sort of benefit for us, or an intention for how the world should unfold?
I am a naturalist. You could even say that it's my natural prejudice to be a naturalist. Everything in me resists the idea that this is a deliberate game. And maybe that resistance is a sort of inner acknowledgement. I don't know. I'm open to my psychological limitations here, but I hold on to naturalism. But as a naturalist, I will immediately volunteer to you that there are incredibly difficult problems for the naturalist, such as the fine-tuning of the universal constants, which is just mind-boggling. It's if anything would deviate like a tiny little amount from their current values, there would be no complexity. There wouldn't be life, planets, galaxies. The fine-tuning is just mind-boggling. And life is I will use a word that a naturalist shouldn't use. Life is a miracle. It's again mind-boggling how the organizing principles of nature seem to push towards richness, complexity, to a great stage, like Shakespeare would call it, with a very complex play going on. I acknowledge that. To go back to psychology, I think to be a good philosopher in this day and age, you have to have some affinity with psychology, because philosophers use only their minds as their instrument. They are not using oscilloscopes and telescopes and whatnot. They use their minds. So it's important that they be acquainted with how that instrument works, so they know how to operate it reliably. When people say, look, we figured it all out, there is no mystery, we know how morphogenesis takes place in the growth of an organism. It's the distribution of certain feuds and signaling molecules and whatnot. And the fine-tuning, well, it's some kind of evolutionary universe in which new universes are produced on the other side of a black hole, and therefore only universes that have complexity can produce black holes and give rise to other universes, and you get the fine-tuning that way. So all of these fantastical stuff that you wouldn't take seriously at all. It's like the talk of a drunk on the corner of the street. And yet people with PhDs will defend this as established fact. Look at the psychology. I think the psychology here is the incredible human need to find closure. Look, there is a theory in psychology called fluid compensation. It's part of terror theory and all that stuff. How do we react to threats? And the greatest threat to a human being is the loss of meaning. Amazingly enough, right? Viktor Frankl was onto this in the 40s and 50s. Now it's sort of experimental psychology showing us the same. It's an enormous threat if we are robbed of meaning. When you deny transcendence, you are robbed of the source of meaning that has given meaning to every generation of humans before you. Everybody was religious in one way or another until the middle of the 19th century. And now many of us deny that, so they lose their key source of meaning. So they have to fluid compensate to another source of meaning. What are the other sources of meaning? Fantastically positive self-image is one. The notion that you contribute to something that survives your existence is another. But a big one is closure. So even though the universe has no meaning, at the end you're going to die anyway, you understood it. You got one up on it. You figured it out, SOB. You figured it out how it works. This is a powerful psychological motivation for people to communicate with great certainty hypotheses that are extraordinarily implausible, let alone proved or substantiated.
Well, and you could even extrapolate that out to say, I mean, I don't want to go here, but I kind of do, that really all of our capitalistic, materialistic culture of consumption is one gigantic distraction from actually having to figure any of this out. Meaning, like, when I look through my Instagram feed, and it's war, it's protests, and then it's like, check out this thigh slit on my dress, right? And I totally get it. Like, you don't have to constantly be immersed in misery. I live it, and it's not really fun. But the cognitive dissonance that I have to sort of like, oh, this is all going on. And there are people for whom that is a safe place to exist. But I think for me, when I was younger, and you and I are the same age, when I was younger, I felt like no one understood me. Like, everybody was so interested in like parties and boys and makeup. And I was like, don't you understand? We're all going to die. You know, and like, that's what happens if you read Sartre and Camus and Dostoevsky too early. You know, you become this like misanthropic, like horrible teenager. But now that I'm an adult, I see that we need all these different kinds of people, but our culture really is priming us to distract, drink it away, smoke it away, like whatever makes you not have to be having this conversation.
There you go. It is the basis even of our economic system. Look, I'm not saying that there is a grand conspiracy, because I don't think any human being is smart enough to find himself in the position of directing a grand conspiracy. I think we are all lost, right? And we react to it in a very spontaneous way. Nietzsche saw this in the second half of the 19th century. He talked about us today as the letzter Mensch, the last humans. And the last humans hop around planet Earth, and they think they invented happiness because they have their little pleasure for the day and their little pleasure for the night. And then they blink and say, we have invented happiness. I almost quoted Nietzsche literally here. These are his words, largely. Today, we know that he was right, first, And we have even a deeper understanding of what the letzter mensch is. The letzter mensch is one that will pursue any addictive avenue available to distract themselves from the immediate questions of life. Who are we? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? And what is this all for? We don't think about that, and we will engage compulsively in patterns of addictive behavior to take our attention away from that. This is how we invented happiness. Lo and behold, this is what moves capitalism. Take this away and many less pairs of shoes will be sold. That's a problem.
Less pairs of shoes, but also we were talking earlier today that 40% of the S&P is focused and propped up by technology companies that their primary motive of interacting with the public is to incite rage. So it's rage capitalist. And you can see, is that a reflection of our internal state that requires us or tries to have us distract from these other meanings? And if so, what is the alternative, right? Like if it's not religion and we need to reconnect with some form of meaning, how do we go about that?
I don't have a recipe for the solution, but I think the path towards a solution doesn't go through blaming, doesn't go through saying that evil people are in control and that this is a deliberate move to destroy the lives of most of us for the benefit of the few who know exactly what's going on. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on. I think everybody is lost. The billionaire is as engaged in compulsive patterns of addiction as anybody else. But instead of buying the next pair of shoes, they are buying the next yacht, the next mansion. And they are also suffering. They also cannot find fulfillment. They are also desperately looking for distraction. Everybody is deep in the crap. So I think the path to a solution is not blaming and revolution. It is a form of mature, non-romantic compassion. It's the recognition that every human being is just trying to do something to suffer less. I think this realization, it's not a solution. I'm not giving you a recipe or the 7 steps to world harmony, but I think at least this gives a direction. The direction is not blame. The direction is a mature, sober form of compassion.
I like that because it really says, let's accept things as they are without trying to vilify and create more drama, which will only lead us further away from the type of love and openness that is required for a solution.
Yes, Jonathan, just look at our situation as humans. We are the first animals that have disconnected from the web of instinct that for everybody else gives them instant answers about what to do and how to behave and how to go about life. We disconnected from the supercomputer of natural instinct. We now think for ourselves.
And Jonathan, it's funny because Jonathan and I met, I don't know, over 15 years ago. We met because we had children the same age. And Jonathan and I both, followed a style of parenting where people told us, you're crazy, you should have a wipes warmer because the baby's tush can't. And we were like, no, we're going to be hippies. We're going to do it. And I'm a lactation educator counselor, right? I help women breastfeed. I gave birth with no drugs. And people are like, you're crazy. All the benefits of society are waiting for you. What could possibly be wrong with that? And the notion, and it's not just about parenting, but the notion that saying there is a wisdom in my body. There's a wisdom in my soul. I'm even going to say that. And it may not feel the same to you as it does to me, but my experience on this planet is to listen to that, to learn the information that I want, to listen to other perspectives and decide how I want to live my life. But that the notion that we have instinct, that there's something evolutionarily beneficial to tapping into that part of us is part of what makes us an organic aspect of the universe.
Yeah, but we don't trust it anymore. We don't listen to it. We replace it with our own stories, our own narratives. So we become utterly disconnected from it. And we live now profoundly unnatural lives. What was the last time you looked up to the sky at night and saw the stars? If you ask that to most people, they will say, let me think about it. I mean, this was a daily occurrence.
It's fascinating. When you look at the star, like, shit happens up there. Like, there's shooting stars, you see patterns, and I always try and figure out, like, why would the Greeks make that a lion? Okay, maybe there must be a lot more stars than I can see, but that you can see the band of the Milky Way where Jonathan lives. You can see the band of the Milky Way. Like, that's amazing. And it was that was what you did to feel closer to something bigger than you. And that's what I always say. If you live in the projects, I understand you don't have nature. If you live in an apartment, you don't have the beautiful. Look up at the sky. That's it. One little hole, one star. That's your connection.
Yes, and not to vilify anyone who may be purposely trying to remove us from this, but there have been a lot of unintended consequences based on decisions that prevent and separate people from this instinct. For example, the fact that most of the sky has so much light pollution in major city centers that you can't actually see it. There are so few dark sky in cities. I happened to live in one last year, and it was shocking how dark it was. Like, terrifyingly dark in a way that you had to get used to. And you're like, oh my God, we have been removed from accessing this connection to nature that could be available to us all the time.
Yes, but why have we been robbed of that? It's because of our own addictive patterns of behavior that aim at distracting us from the real questions that confront us. We want to continue to be distracted at night. Therefore, we have to illuminate everything, and we still want to go for a drink and dance at night and talk to others and read and whatnot. So that's the first tragedy that happened to us and that we should feel compassionate for. We've lost our connection to instinct. We are the first and only animal on this planet that unplugged from the supercomputer that orients life for everybody else, not for us. We replace that with our own tiny little chatter. That's the first tragedy. The second tragedy is also the greatest tool we have always had. We have become self-reflective. We are the only animals that die. Nobody else dies because they don't have the thought, I'm going to die. So they never die. My cat doesn't die.
That doesn't feel very fair.
We are the only ones that die because we are the only ones that know that we are going to die.
Having a conversation about death is uniquely Homo sapiens sapiens, as far as we know.
Yes. You can see other higher animals grieving. I think there is sufficient evidence that some higher primates, pachyderms like elephants, they do grieve. Even corvidians, some birds, they do grieve. But I don't think they are going around telling themselves, one day it's going to be me. Therefore, what should I do? We are the only ones. So it is exquisitely difficult to be human. And I think that's the realization that we should always keep in the back of our minds as a background to casting blame. We should cast blame. Sometimes we must cast blame. I damn blame Putin right now for the catastrophe that is unfolding in my continent. Again, after 8 years at this scale, I blame him squarely, and there is nothing in my philosophy that tells me that I shouldn't. But the background of my blame casting is it's exquisitely difficult to be Vladimirovich Putin, just as it is exquisitely difficult to be me. And his humanity connects with mine. Not in the sense of holding hands and singing the Kumbaya. You bet if I had the chance, I would shove him in a very nice, cozy cell here in The Hague.
This comes up when we talk to people who have had near-death experiences. And this comes up frequently because people love to ask, because people with near-death experiences, most typically, statistically speaking, right, thousands and thousands of reports, they report experiencing a connection with something greater than themselves that is indescribable. It's eternal. It's light. It's love. Some people see Jesus, like whatever, God, whatever you want to call it. And what do people love to ask these individuals? Where are all the bad people? Where's Hitler? Is Hitler there too? In God's warm, loving embrace? To which people who have had NDEs say, I can't explain it. I can't explain that there is an aspect of being in touch with consciousness, is that there is something that potentially unites all of humanity, and horrible things will happen in the human experience. But where are the places where we can still say there is, I don't want to say goodness. They're all just human words, right? It's like you can't even articulate it.
From my limited human perspective, I look around and I see a nature in which what we call evil is as prevalent as what we call good. And many times, not in a malicious way. I mean, I often talk about this experience I had many years ago as I was watching a nature documentary in which a pride of elephants isolated a grown elephant and brought the elephant down. The pride of lions consumed the elephant from the hind legs up for 6 hours before the elephant passed out, not die. That is nature. This stuff happens. If we were in the neighborhood of a star about to go supernova, yeah, no, we should be giving ourselves our last rites right now. It's nature. It's not like supernova is malicious. People who are killed by tornadoes, you don't go and say the tornado is malicious. No, the tornado just doesn't know what it's doing. It literally does not know what it's doing. Many human beings do not know what they are doing. Supernovae don't know what they are doing. And a pride of lions doesn't really know what they are doing. They don't have the capacity of empathy to realize what they are putting another living being, which is themselves, through. So there is reason for compassion. I think, look, we are always looking for solutions, and sometimes that's not the game. Sometimes the game is not to solve the problem, but to abide in the problem with some degree of compassion for ourselves. Some things are not problems to be solved, but experiences to be lived. So when we say we are distracting ourselves because we don't want to confront the real problems, and people believe it, and then they will say, okay, now I will confront the real problem, but I need to solve it. That's the gut instinct of our society. We are culturally indoctrinated to think in these terms. If you acknowledge a problem, you have to immediately start thinking about solution, and your life will only be worth living after you find that solution. And until then, it's just work to be done. It all just only starts when you find the solution. That is a problem. I think an avenue to explore is to, okay, stop the compulsive, addictive pattern of distraction that we are all engaged in and which moves our entire economic system, look deeper, and then it will stop by itself. And then you will see the real problem, and it's a gargantuan abyss. It's monstrous. It's about to swallow us up. And then the way to go, I think, is not to say, okay, how do I solve it then? How do I close the abyss and walk to the other side? No, I think acknowledging how frightful our condition intrinsically is as human beings, disconnected from instinct and knowing they're going to die, how frightful it is inherently, and then having a little compassion for ourselves and being okay with not being able to solve everything immediately and abide in the presence of the problem, of the question, without having to solve it or being distracted from it.
I'm going to ask a question that might sound funny, but I don't mean it funny. Why don't you do interviews anymore? Why are you talking to us? I would listen to you all day, every day. Why are you keeping humanity from you?
This is a completely different interview from what I usually go through. And I knew that. That's why I accepted your your invitation, because I smelled it. I watched some of your previous episodes as well. Normally, in regular interviews, I'm just asked all the questions I've answered 3,000 times already. And there is a point where I think I'm not really adding value by doing it again, you know. But I am not surprised that you guys didn't that at all. You didn't even use the word idealism or daimon once today. And I'm very grateful to you for it.
I want to connect some of the topics that we have been discussing today, including this notion of us being a reflection and part of a larger consciousness system. And I think a lot about the mirrored systems of the world that we live in and potentially the universe at large, all the way down to the level of the physical body in terms of how the immune system is functioning. And you have described this, but I think you can describe it in this context even more fully, the experiment by which cancer stopped growing. Can you explain to us the experiment and then what that might be saying about our place connected to a larger consciousness system and maybe the inherent wisdom, both of the body, and it even relates to meaning and purpose that we may have individually?
Okay, this is not my work. This is Professor Michael Levin's work at Tufts. All credit goes to him, and I probably cannot properly represent his work here, so I'll do it in a more or less cumbersome way.
But it does touch on some of these larger theories, so that's one of the reasons. So I appreciate the caveat, and also I think it's important because sometimes this can be such a esoteric concept, but it does come back down to many things that people struggle with, including health, how their immune system functions, and then even, feeling lost in the world and trying to find their way.
Yes, and Michael himself is well aware of it. We have had several discussions because my own metaphysics, analytic idealism is something that may inform some of the results he is seeing. But of course, in his publications, in his scientific publications, there is no talk of metaphysics, as there shouldn't be. These are empirical results. So the experiment goes as follows. You take cancer cells that are riddled with all the genetic mutations that lead to cancer and aggressive cancer. You take human cancer cells. I believe it was melanoma in the particular experiment I have in my mind right now. And you implant it in a frog. And of course, the cancer takes hold and multiplies and eventually kills the frog. What Michael realized is that if he controls the biochemical field that surrounds the cells, a field that seems to give the body a cue about the body plan, which is a global field. It's not only local chemical signaling. There is a bioelectrical field that seems to coordinate morphogenesis, coordinate how cells grow, so they know where they are and what they should do and what they should look like given the place where they are. So cells in the frog's arms are arm cells, and cells in the frog's lungs are lung cells. So this bioelectric field seems to coordinate that. And what Michael did is taking this as a hypothesis, the bioelectric field coordinates growth. What will it do if I force the correct bioelectric field in the organism in which I just implanted cancer cells? Lo and behold, the cancer doesn't grow, regardless of these terrible genetic mutations that otherwise would correlate with very aggressive cancer. I believe the frog in question is still alive. You don't need to keep on forcing that bioelectric field 24/7. You apply the treatment and the tumor comports itself.
When we talk about a bioelectric field, right, what we're talking about is the method of transmission for all, cells, right, for neurons, for the nervous system, is through a series of electrical signals. It's voltage, literally. Voltage changes, and that releases the opening of certain channels that allow ions to flow in different directions. Everything that you're experiencing is actually from electrical signals that are being sent down axons and dendrites, which, if you've heard of multiple sclerosis, it's that myelinated sheath that in multiple sclerosis, the signals can't get through, right? That's the signals we're talking about.
The wire insulation goes bad.
Correct. Yeah. So we're, that's the network. So what this kind of experiment is talking about is if you manipulate the biological environment and the proportion or the distribution of signaling, you are changing the milieu, as it were. You're changing an electrical environment that has an impact on then what signaling is occurring or not. So it's a very intricate, and he didn't just do it with cancer. So this is something that can be done with growth of limbs, regeneration. And, I don't know. I think the question that Jonathan also wants you to sort of tackle is, how much can we extrapolate this out? Jonathan, has history of working in energy and across fields that we cannot see, but many people experience. Can we extrapolate this out more from a philosophical perspective to say there is an extension, right? I mean, Neil Thies talks about this with the fascia of the body and with the microbiome, right, that we share, right? When I live in a house with you, we share something special as organisms that other people don't. What does this say for a larger understanding of our experience?
So, of course, the temptation is to say, well, it's just local electrical signaling, it's we know that, we understand that, and then there's nothing extraordinary here. But let me give you another study that Michael performed 12 years ago in 2013. He took some planaria, which are these little aquatic flatworms. They have a small brain, and their entire nervous system is in their head. They have 2 eyes and a tail, and then they know how to navigate water. So Michael put them in an aquarium and trained them to navigate a sort of a maze in the substrates to find food. And it took a while, but they learned. So they had to navigate a sort of a maze in the substrate of the aquarium to find food. And eventually they learned how to navigate that maze, so they could find food much faster than first time around. They learned how to get to where the food is. And then what Michael then proceeded to do was to decapitate them all. And planaria have this amazing feature. If you cut off any part of their bodies, they grow a new one, including their heads. So here are these planaria that have learned, they are trained.
So if you cut off the head and you grow back the head, the question is, will they still know how to navigate the maze?
Yeah, and they take 2 weeks to grow a new head, and lo and behold, they go straight for the food.
What?
Yeah. So even though all their neurons are in their heads, and all neurons were dissected when they were decapitated, they grow a new one, they still remember. So, okay, now give me an account of that in terms of local, electrochemical impulses.
Well, I mean, I was instantly thinking, if you tell me to stop dating people who are emotionally unavailable, and I say I never want to experience this pain again, when presented with an emotionally unavailable person, I will gravitate towards that person like a planaria that's been decapitated.
There you go. Multiple instances of the principle at hand here. Look, this was published in a respected peer-reviewed journal in 2013 by a group at Tufts University, which is very respected. Michael Levin, very respected. Why aren't people talking about this, right? But here you go. So the hypothesis here is that this field effect, it's not only about morphogenesis, it's also about memory. It's about mind. And mind seems to permeate everything, and mind seems to be field-like. And it has applications in remembering stuff when your head is cut off and controlling the non-growth of cancer, or not allowing mere genetic mutations from developing into an actual cancer. And it also shows that cancer is not only about genetic mutations. It's not only that, if you knock off the wrong base pair somewhere in our cell, now you're condemned to cancer. No, because these base pairs are knocked off all the time. There was this old study done with people who died in car accidents, because it's a very neutral sampling of the population. And a lot of them had tiny little cancerous tumors. For most of them, those tumors are going nowhere. It's not genetic mutation alone. You may need a genetic mutation to be present to prime the process, but it's something else.
Well, the field of mind-body syndrome and what is psychosomatic pain, right? The whole field of chronic pain is predicated on this notion that if you get a scan, for example, and you have a herniated disc at L4, everybody gets a herniated disc at L4 or L2 to L4, right? you have back pain, you need surgery. And Dr. Sarno, right, was the person who kind of revolutionized this notion in particular of back pain, but it has been expanded to understanding chronic pain in general. Many people in multiple longitudinal studies, many people who have herniated discs report no pain. But also I think about how this applies to conversations about trauma and PTSD in particular. We know there are all these other factors. You know, everybody's favorite word, if you've been on social media lately, is triggered. This triggered me. This triggered me. This triggered me. And as a neuroscientist, I'm thinking, what's the mechanism of this trigger, right? What are we talking about? What pathway are we talking about that keeps getting activated, right?
Let me just very quickly start with a disclaimer. I take modern Western medicine very seriously. If I had cancer, I would go through the standard protocols of treatment, right? Now, having said that, here's what I think. What the science and the philosophy seem to be showing is that when it comes to health, when it comes to mind, when it comes to memories, all these things seem to be holistic. They are not local patterns of causation. They are holistic. They depend on a overall plan that may appear to us in the form of what we call fields. So in that sense, what is cancer? Cancer is when a part of the body doesn't follow this holistic body plan. It goes off on a tangent. It thinks, oh, I am my own thing, and I have to secure my own future. So let's grow some new cells to conquer more territory because we need to survive. It's exactly what we would do when we think that we are separate from our own environment. We are cancerous. We go off on our own journey because we think we are our own people. We are not following a sort of a broader natural body plan. So cancer, in terms of psychology, it's a form of dissociation. I use this metaphor with Michael, and I will let him tell you what he thinks about it. Cancer, if you understand the process psychically in terms of mental processes, and if Cosmopsychism is right, then everything is a mental processes that merely appears or looks like matter. Cancer is a form of dissociation, like when it becomes dissociated from yourself, in cognitive dissonance, or as a result of trauma, when people undergo dissociative identity disorder, a part of you thinks it's separate from the rest of you. You're psychologically dissociated. Well, that's just like cancer. Cancer cells don't follow the body plan, the overall body plan. They go off on their own road. Now, if you understand things this way, what is the worst possible mental attitude you could have if you are diagnosed with cancer? Is to say, I'm going to fight it. I am at war with the cancer. That only bloody reinforces the dissociation. What you want to do is bring that lost part of yourself back to the body plan so it plays in harmony with the rest of the orchestra instead of following its own tune. Like Fasnacht in Switzerland, the Swiss carnival, in which everybody plays a different song at the same time in the same place. So our entire society sort of programs us with what I believe to be a very unhelpful mental attitude when it comes to some of our conditions, including cancer. We go to war with it. We want to extirpate it. We want to kill it. No, if I am ever diagnosed with cancer, and chances are one day I will do chemotherapy. But my inner attitude would be, if I'm talking to the cancer, my inner attitude would be this: I'm sorry I'm going to do this. This is not what I wanted. You are part of me. I want you to come back. But you're really off on your own trajectory. And if I allow you to continue, you will kill both of us. So I can't do that, but I want you to come back. I'm not at war with you. That would be my inner attitude to it. So it's an attitude of self-compassion. It's not like cancer is a monster that parachuted from somewhere else within you. It is bloody you.
It reminds me of conversations like Louise Hay, who's like, the part of your body that's sick will tell you the information about what it needs, right? And while that's, it's kind of on the other edge of the universe from what we're talking about, but it's actually not, right? Gabor Mate talks about this. Van der Kolk talks about it too. Where does trauma rest in your body?
trauma, unmet needs.
Mate talks about it. Women are typically the caregivers, the doers, the shove it down, just do it. And, every woman has a thyroid condition. It's literally the chakra. It is the center of owning your voice, right?
A lot of parts work too is how do you reintegrate the parts of yourself? It speaks to the Julia Mossbridge time travel therapy where we're going back in, and it speaks a lot to unmet needs too, because I think we should expand a little bit on this idea of the body plan, because it feels like it's a part of your mission purpose in life. Like, what do you mean by when you say the body plan?
Oh, I was just talking the scientific language that Michael probably would use, that the bioelectric fields have tremendous causal influence in morphogenesis, in the emergence of form in our body. In other words, they sort of determine the body plan, partly at least, if not fully. But going back to philosophy, how would I interpret that from a cosmopsychist perspective? Under cosmopsychism, everything in nature is a mental phenomenon. And what that mental phenomenon looks like when observed from outside is what we call physicality. That's why my inner life, which is mental, looks to you like a very physical body made of the same atoms and force fields that constitute the rest of the universe. So under cosmopsychism, the body, the physical thing, is just appearance. It's not the thing in itself. It's like the image that you project on the screen, but not the actual projector. It's the external appearance of it. So cancer, too, is a mental process. The body plan is a mental process. It's an archetypal idea in a mind that is reflected on the outside or appears on the outside as a body following a certain anatomy, a certain plan. This is very important because if this hypothesis, cosmopsychism or idealism, is correct, we really have to reevaluate how we think about things. Because when we think about physical things, we tend to think in terms of mechanisms, like a car engine. In other words, we don't think about it in mental terms, like a pattern of thinking and feeling, which may also obey regularities that appear as the laws of physics, but it's a different way to think about it. When you think of cancer as a mental phenomenon with experiential qualities, you bring psychology into bear. When you think about the expansion of the universe in cosmopsychism terms, you have to bring in a form of cosmic psychology, because the thing in itself is mental. Physicality is just an appearance. And this shift from thinking about things as mechanisms to thinking about things as the results or the appearance of psychological dynamics is very fruitful, naturally reorients our search for solutions for a better life in a very natural and intuitive way. So if this is correct, it's critical that we think along the correct lines. Stop thinking in terms of mechanisms, start thinking in terms of psychological dynamics that do have regularities. In psychology, you call them archetypes. They do have regularities, but they have qualities. They are feeling toned. They are not blind, stupid, random mechanisms.
This follows so much about many holistic practitioners approach the mind and body as an integrated system and trying to understand how our perspective is going to influence our biology. We've spoken to a lot of people on the podcast who are taking Western medicine and saying we have to integrate the other parts of our reality and our experience to know how it's impacting our biology, and we are not only biological. So this aligns to a lot of what we've been hearing.
We know the placebo effect exists. It's actually a problem because for you to approve a new drug, you have to show to the FDA that it is X% better than placebo, and placebo is getting better. So it's getting more difficult to approve. Placebo is not denied by anyone with any awareness of what's going on. It's a growing phenomenon. It's very strong. Even placebo operations of the knee seem to have compelling results, not only sugar pills.
There was this whole study where people went in for fake knee surgery, and the people who got the knee surgery versus didn't get the knee surgery, there was no statistical difference in the result. Repairing a tendon in the knee seems to be something that is extraordinarily physical.
There you go. So we are in a situation in our society today where everybody acknowledges that placebo happens. But nobody's thinking, well, what does it mean then? How can a mental state completely influence the physical state of the body? Well, under Cosmopsychism, the body is a mental process. And the appearance of that mental process is what we call the body, but everything is mental. So it is no surprise at all for the idealist or the cosmopsychist that the placebo effect is there. It's a necessity. It's exactly what you would expect. But because we deny that something like this should happen, even though we know it does, because it's an empirical fact, we don't even have the immediate next thoughts, which are, how do we use the placebo effect in treatment? Shamans worldwide have been doing this for millennia. All that cigarette smoke blowing and feathers and dancing and screaming, what do you think that is? It is to induce the placebo effect. In the West, until around the middle of the 19th century, most of medicine was the placebo effect. The good doctors were the doctors that had a reassuring bed presence. Those were the good doctors, figures of authority.
I don't know if it's fair to say it's placebo. I think that harnessing the power of the mind is functionally significant.
But that's what I'm saying.
But like when I use self-hypnosis, Jonathan loves when I talk about giving birth. When I use hypnosis and I don't experience birth as a traumatic state of suffering from which I need to escape or whatever, that is harnessing the power of my mind, right?
Yes. Yeah, we just happen to call it placebo, which is a sort of demeaning name because it sounds like insignificant, random. And this is a cognitive dissonance in our culture because everybody who is anybody looking into this acknowledges the placebo effect is there, and it's not small even. It's compelling. You know, there are cases in the literature, I'm not sure you could call this placebo, but it goes under the same category, where you could cure warts through talk therapy.
Oh, this is Dr. Amir Raz wrote The Suggestible Brain, and he talks all about these incredible cases. He cured Tourette's syndrome. You know, like these things, because he told this little kid, like, oh, I've got this machine and it can detect when you're going to have a tick. The kid had no ticks anymore. Like, unbelievable.
We have this cognitive dissonance. We know it's there, but we dismiss it and we don't try to explore it. So we look at the shaman as an idiot, because there is no way blowing tobacco smoke, shaking feathers, and doing a dance can have causative effect on anything. Well, think again. If the patient believes that it does, then it has. And what is the causative effect? A mental inner state, a mental attitude affects a mental process. And the image of that mental process is the body. There is nothing logical here.
The New York Times, my father just recently sent me an article talking about how it's been observed and studied that the lack of meaning and purpose in someone's life increases cognitive decline.
No surprise to the idealist or the cosmopsychist. We don't exploit these things, and we are comfortably numb because we know the phenomenon is there. Our entire metaphysics tells us it shouldn't be there, but it is, and we don't abandon our metaphysics, and we don't leverage it. And the result of that is that, at least in my country, and I'm very happy for how medicine is practiced in the Netherlands compared to where you guys are. In the Netherlands, it's not commercialized at all, and the idea is minimal intervention. You only intervene when it makes a difference. You don't just intervene for no reason or just because it makes the patient feel better. So I'm grateful to that. There are no commercials about medicines in the Netherlands. It's completely cut away from any notion of profit and commercialization. I'm grateful for that. But today in the Netherlands, you go to your doctor, and only in extremely rare circumstances your doctor will even touch you. Your doctor will listen to your story and then either will give you some medicines or will order some exams. In other words, it is evidence-based medicine. I'm all for it. But we are leaving on the table the greatest value that medicine had until the middle of the 19th century, which was the reassurance of your doctor, the authority of your doctor. What now goes under the name the placebo effect. We don't reassure anyone. According to the law, your doctor has to be completely truthful and honest towards you. So if there is a 0.01% that thing is a cancer, your doctor has to say it may be. That's where we are now. This is where we are. We think the body is a mechanism, and therefore doctors become mechanics. And I think this is a tragedy, because the evidence is screaming in our faces that this is not what is actually going on. There is something to be said about the little dance and the blowing smoke, except that it should be adapted to our expectations, our cultural references, something other than that.
You know, here in Los Angeles, you can't swing a dead cat without finding someone who did an ayahuasca journey. And the notion, you know, when you hear from indigenous people who use these kind of medicines, it's in an entire cultural framework that has a language and a vocabulary. It's not just like you drop in with your girlfriends after the pedicure and like do some ayahuasca or, you know, have a mushroom journey, which I know a lot of people, and, you know, there's many fascinating and very significant studies about, you know, the use of psilocybins therapeutically in particular. But that notion that there's a framework for, in particular, mystical practices, which is also why I'm so interested in your story. And I mean, we may have to ask you back for another interview another day. I have so many things to ask you.
When I think about the body having intelligence and having a plan, I actually think each one of us are on some sort of course that we may or may not realize ahead of time. And we spoke to Rizwan Virk, who talked about how he was hospitalized when he believed his life went off plan. He knew from a very young age, he had a vision of he was going to work in the video game industry and become a venture capitalist. And then he knew at some point he was going to transition. And when he didn't transition his life, he fell ill. Now, could it be coincidence? Sure. But I think a lot of people, especially who have chronic disease or have significant health issues, they end up reevaluating their life and say, what really brings me joy? How do I connect with something that I truly feel alive and happy to be doing? And that begins to change how their body is on the physical level. So we can see it again in these married reflective states.
That's also a huge component of this book and the struggle that you experienced and what literally you were confronted with.
Yeah, how to reorient my life and accept that reorientation when all the narratives of the culture would tell me, no, you're on the right path right now, don't change anything. Our culture tells us everything about what Jung called and James Hollis calls the first half of life. It's not really half, it's the first part of life, so to say. Because in that phase of life, we have to carve out a space in the world for ourselves. We have to find a way to have a roof over our heads, food on the table, pay for health insurance and the mortgage and so on, right? So our culture gives us the steps to get to that place. You know, go to a good school, and then professional education, or go to a university, you know, find a partner to have kids, and then get a good mortgage and a good health insurance, find a good job, progress in your career, attain some reputation, and accumulate some resources. Now you have carved out a place in the world for yourself, and you have some resources to express something in the world. What do you do with it now? And our culture is completely mute about that. It doesn't give us anything. And then what you end up seeing is septuagenarian adolescents, people who keep on playing the same game because they don't know the game has changed. So they keep playing the only game they know how to play. More money, more resources, more status, more power, and then the plasma replacement theory, so you live more years.
And then you build a ballroom.
Yeah, or you compete to be the highest in the Forbes list.
you either save it and don't use it, right? Because you're leaving it for some abstract existence that you're not even going to experience, right? You have this like this awe, this like shock and awe relationship with, money that you're essentially worshiping as a god, which is a great transition to the question, what happens when we die? So if consciousness is this sort of thing that exists, right? You said like the body doesn't have consciousness, consciousness has the body, right? What is happening? Because Jonathan and I spend a lot of time talking to people who have a tremendous amount of certainty that consciousness exists. For many of them, it comes as a download, when they are out of their body, as it were. What does your sort of worldview and universe view allow happens next? And can you and I hang out when we die?
Probably more than you expect. I'll segue into answering your question just by completing the thought of the previous one, but I'll sew them together in such a way that you think I'm just answering your question. Look, nature is stronger than culture, right? Even though culturally we don't get a recipe for the second half of life, nature is trying to do something through us because we didn't parachute here. We are creations of nature. We are nature expressing itself. And then the challenge is, how do you listen to that and you allow yourself to be played by nature as an instrument, as opposed to artificially imposing the rules of the game that's not being played anymore, which is the first half of life? Now, eventually that comes to an end, right? According to nature's plan, it will come to an end. How do I see that? The only way to talk about death is to first understand what life is, right? Because death is the end of whatever life is. So we need to understand life. As an idealist, cosmopsychist, you could say, I think there is only one mind in nature. If we postulate multiple fundamentally distinct minds, we run into all kinds of problems, not the least of which is the interaction problem. It is a shit show. So you avoid all that by starting with, okay, one field of subjectivity in the universe. That's the only thing that exists. Everything else is what mental processes in this one field of subjectivity look like from the perspective of other mental processes in it. But then the immediate criticism is, well, my inner life is not universal. I don't know what you are thinking about, what you're feeling. I don't know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda. My mind seems to be very defined and localized in space and separate from all the rest. Well, you can reconcile that with there being only one mind, because we know from psychology, from the phenomenon or the condition called dissociation, especially extreme forms of dissociation like dissociative identity disorder, in which what was originally one mental space apparently fragments itself into multiple disjoint centers of awareness. We know this happens. We know it empirically. We know it clinically.
They can also have distinct physiological states as well, which is fascinating. Yeah.
The body is the appearance of mental processes. So dissociated mental processes that differentiate from each other will lead to different appearances. And also, I'm not surprised by that. So the hypothesis that I put forward is that what we call life, biology, is the appearance of a dissociative process in this one field of subjectivity. And the boundary of the dissociation appears as the skin, the eardrums, the retinas, the outer surface of our body. And that's why we think we are separate from the rest, because what we think of as ourselves is a mental process dissociated from the other mental processes that are unfolding in our immediate cognitive neighborhood, because there is a dissociative boundary in between. So life is what dissociation looks like. So what is death? It's the end of the dissociation, right? It's the immediate implication of this account of life is that death is the end of the dissociation. And if that is true, then death is precisely the opposite of what physicalism would say. Physicalism would say death is the end of consciousness, it's the end of your inner life. Analytic idealism, cosmopsychism, as I interpret it, would say death is the end of the dissociation. Therefore, it's an unfathomable growth of your inner life because you reconnect with your cognitive neighborhood. So you become many times more than you thought you were. Think of it as what happens when you wake up from a dream. A dream is a dissociative state. When we are dreaming, we identify with our dream avatar, not with the rest of the dream, even though we are the whole thing. We are doing the entire thing, right? When we wake up, our dream avatar dies. It's toast. It is the end of your dream avatar. But what happens from your first-person perspective? Why are you dreaming? Your mental inner life is small. It's constrained by the circumstances of the dream. When that dissociative state we call dreaming ends because you woke up, you still remember your dream. You didn't lose that. But now you know much more. You went back to a much broader state of mind, meaning your entire life, your past, your present, your entire world, not just the dream. I submit to you that death should be very analogous to that as experienced from a first-person perspective. It's probably a mind-boggling enlargement of our field of awareness because it's the end of a dissociation. And the best model we have for death today are psychedelics, because we know now that their effect is to reduce brain activity. They don't light up your brain like a Christmas tree, like we used to think until 2012. They actually suppress brain activity. What is death? Well, it's the ultimate suppression of brain activity. So if you take psychedelics to be the best model we have for the experience of death, ego dissolution and the tremendous expansion of awareness during a psychedelic trip probably only gives us minor taste of what the experience of death is, which is the cessation of the dissociation, not just a weakening of the dissociative boundary, which is what I think psychedelics do, but a complete cessation of the dissociation. If you ask me, am I afraid of it? You bet I am. I'm bloody terrified of it. It was much better to think that death is the end of it, because there is nobody there to be afraid, to experience surprise, horror, whatever. And in my worldview of today, which I truly believe in, and I live accordingly, death is a very tricky thing, because I know I will be there to witness that. And if a psychedelic trip, is a sobering experience, whoa, I'm bloody terrified with the whole affair, if you ask me.
Do you partake in psychedelics, or is this something you've tried to dabble in as a kind of consciousness expansion?
I haven't done it in years. I don't feel the call to do it again, but I have done it several times, high doses, over 10 years ago as a part of a personal study plan. I didn't do it like people would normally do, like with friends to have fun and experiment with it. I read the entire bloody literature. I went to my doctor. I had my liver checked, my heart checked. I had a plan. I had a protocol. Start with low doses to test my sensitivity, then grow slowly. I had the whole shebang about how to go through it in a deliberate way, and I had copious notes. I tried to train myself to maintain my self-reflection during the journey so I could come back and write it down. And so I did all that. So I had pretty deep psychedelic experiences. I took vast doses at some point because I realized I'm a very hard head. It's very difficult to shift me off my baseline consciousness. So what happens is if I take a medium dose or even a high dose, I resist it. I don't break through. So to break through, I need to take a dose that completely smashes me.
There's so many components of the diamond and the soul of the West, finding identity, meaning, and purpose in a sacrificial life that, I could do an episode on each of the chapters. It's so great. One of the most human things that you talk about is how you experienced tinnitus. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit both about how that resolved, meaning how you've gotten to the place that you are, and also what you believe that diagnosis and journey has led you to.
So my tinnitus sounds like a dentist's drill, and I have one inside each ear, so it's stereo. It's 24/7. There is no off button. A couple of years ago, I became religious, And I had this profound, sincere gut prayer to God. And my desire was, can you please give me 10 seconds of silence? That was all I wanted. That was the miracle I needed. Give me 10 seconds of silence so I can experience silence again. So it's not the end of it. It's not like I'm locked out of paradise forever, because I am a natural introvert. Silence for me is very important. My level of tinnitus clinically is the same level that 2 or 3 people in the Netherlands every year undergo euthanasia.
So I just want to be clear. The kind of tinnitus that you experienced qualifies for a request for euthanasia.
Yeah, and 2 or 3 people do it per year on average here. There was one case that was very publicized, and the woman was vilified because she had 2 young children, and she did it anyway.
Yes, I remember this case.
I almost committed suicide twice. Today, the tinnitus is there. It didn't change much, really, and I'm perfectly okay with it. I mean, almost complete peace with it. There are some brief exceptions to that, and I'm like, this is an annoying thing. But there are many days I go through the entire day without thinking of it. Of course, now I hear it because you're talking about it, and it's in the center of my head. The tinnitus is there. It did something for me. We were talking about the transition from the first to the second half of life. In the nature of the game changes completely, but we resist that transition because all of our adaptive armor is effective only for the game of the first half of life. So you resist becoming naked again without having any adaptive weapons to deal with the new game. So I resisted it a lot, and I'm bloody strong. I can resist stuff, all the way to catastrophe. I'm very hard-headed in that sense. And the only thing that broke me was the tinnitus. Tinnitus just flattened me. It was the end of me. And it changes you, because once suicide is a very concrete thing that is going to happen. It's not an abstract idea. It's not a hypothesis. It is going to happen in the next 30 minutes. Once you've been there, it becomes impossible to orient your life in terms of what you stand to lose, because you were just there ready to lose everything voluntarily and gladly in a hurry. Once your mind is imprinted with that, it's very hard to go back and say, I'm not going to do this because my financial security, that life changes in that way. So tinnitus did it to me. It opened me up to the second half of life. I quit my job. I started a foundation, Essentia Foundation. Well, I didn't start it. Fred Matters is the founder and the architect behind it, but I started dedicating my life to it. Recently, I sort of went back to technology. I started an AI company that is also a pattern of the second half of life, in the sense that I'm not doing it for money or status. I'm doing it because I think somebody should do AI in a responsible way. And I don't see myself as the hero, but if I have the thought and I don't do anything about it, then I'm just a hypocrite. So if I have the thought, I should do something about it. I face life in a much softer way now. I don't try to control everything. I'm loser. I'm too keenly aware now that I've never been in control. I am not, and I will never be. It was an illusion to think that I was in control. So I don't try to be in control, because I know it's impossible. It's a very different way to live life, a much more natural way, I think. At least that's how I experience it.
Well, and one of the most, powerful and powerless experiences we can have is that of love. And, for me, as in neuroscience, people are always like, well, explain love. And I say, well, I can do that. I can tell you all the chemicals. I can tell you all the things. I can tell you physiologically what's happening. I can do it. But I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about Claudia, because the way that you speak about your experience of connection and love with another human, many people are searching for that one, or they're searching even in their relationship for a point of deep connection. I wonder if you can explain, as someone who is so grounded in technology, in AI, in philosophy, what is the purpose? And for you, what is the sort of theoretical mechanism of love?
What love was for me had nothing to do with what I thought it was. I also didn't see it immediately. I resisted it for months. It didn't care about my expectations, my models, my preferences, my ideas. It wholly ignored the checklists. Does she check this box and that box? Pros and cons. Completely ignored that, and it was not like what people refer to as falling in love. It had nothing to do with infatuation. It operated in its own terms. It was relaxed. It wasn't possessive. It just felt right. And it kept on feeling right. And at some point, I surrendered to feeling right. And it's been 12 years.
I love that. And, I was very, very moved in this book in particular when you talked about how that love was one of the primary things that you feared harming if you harmed yourself.
Yes.
I found that very moving because, you're such a rational person and you've got all the things and all, like you said, everything is very compartmentalized and it kind of like it breaks your heart, right? And the notion that there was a life waiting for you on the other side of that pain, there was something waiting for you to kind of hold this next part of your life, and that she was kind of the window to that.
That was in the two occasions that I was very concretely following the steps of suicide. It was the middle of the night. Claudia was asleep, and I was, going through the motions of doing the thing. And then the image came to me of what she would see the next day when she would wake up. And that image just, it's like you're hit in the face with a 2x4. And the immediate feeling is, this would be so incredibly unfair and selfish of me to do this. And that, and of course, a generous dose of cowardice stopped me both times. It's very clear to me, not in a conceptual way, not in terms of opinion, but as a felt experience, the whole psychological trajectory about suicide with me was resting on this notion that my life was about my happiness, my well-being, and therefore if tinnitus made my happiness impossible, then my life had no more point. And today I look back at that and I realized how incredibly fucked up that kind of thought is. It's so unnatural. It is incredibly unnatural for any one of us to think that our lives are about us. That's not how nature operates. The life of the apple blossom is not about the bloody apple blossom. It's about the whole scheme of apple trees and life on earth and the universe and all that. But we are locked into this notion. I certainly was locked into this notion that the purpose of life was to make myself happy. And if therefore that would be impossible, and it was impossible in my view because of tinnitus, then I should pull the plug. And the image of Claudia finding what she would find the next day coming to me revealed in a very sort of pungent, guttural way, very clear, not conceptual, without intermediaries, how absolutely rubbish that notion was, that my life was about me. That image made it crystal clear that that was not true. And of course, as a philosopher, that was a little thread hanging, and I started pulling from that thread. And the result is what you saw in the book, which is that my life is not about my tinnitus. And therefore, I'm in almost complete peace with my tinnitus today. There was some time ago a friend who is a researcher at an academic medical center here in the Netherlands. He was telling me, oh, there is new research, to control tinnitus by giving shocks to the back of your tongue. And then I was listening to that, and I thought, the feeling came to me, even if this is true, even if this works, I don't need it. It's okay as it is now. Now, I almost fall off my chair telling this to you because it's such an impossible thing. And yet this is how I feel. I didn't pursue that. I'm okay with my tinnitus. It is, if I could transfer it to you for 30 seconds, I think it would drive most human beings absolutely insane. At 30 seconds of that, you would say, I cannot live with this at all. But amazingly, nature is such that you can find a place in your mindscape where even this is perfectly okay, so much so you're not even trying to get rid of it anymore. And a lot of it has to do with this notion that is very ingrained in me now, which is, my life is not about me. So if I am not happy with my tinnitus, who the F cares? It is not about me. Yes, there is a bloody tinnitus. It's not preventing me from thinking, from feeling, from doing something in the world, from expressing what nature wants to express through me. So I sleep like an angel, tinnitus and all.
It reminds me of that quote that we talk about, death is only the end if you assume that the story's about you. And I guess that's true for everything that ails us.
I think it's the most oppressive thought a human being can have is the thought, my life is about me. Because now you are in a catch-22 of a magnitude that is unlike anything else. Because it is completely impossible to make sure that you will be happy. Because the sheer number of variables that have an impact on how you feel is so mind-boggling. You can't even catalog them, let alone control them. So you convince yourself that the purpose and sole meaning of your life is to do something that is completely unachievable. It is the biggest shackle you could ever put yourself in. It's a disaster thought. If you truly believe it, your life is about you. You are in for a ride that is not fun. And the problem is that everything in our culture, including the well-being industry, is telling you that your life is about you and you should take the reins of your life and you should take the steps so you achieve that which is impossible, which is to be happy all the time, to have control over life, the universe, and everything. You're not in control. You're not in control of your life, of your body, of what is happening around you, not even of your actions, many of which are taken through unconscious impulses or subconscious impulses. So liberating myself from that is something that I don't think wouldn't have happened to me. It's not an achievement. You don't achieve this kind of liberation. It happens to you. And I think tinnitus was one of the instruments that allowed it to happen to me. Today, I find it risible, laughable, the thought that my life is about me and yours is about you. It's like saying the life of the apple blossom is about the apple blossom. That good luck with that thought.
Bernardo Kastrup, it's been an incredible honor to get to talk to you. If people want to learn more about the work that you do, where would you like us to direct them?
BernardoKastrup.com for my personal philosophical perspectives, or EssentiaFoundation.org for the broader work that we are trying to do, including the thoughts of many other better, greater scholars than I am.
Thank you so much. This was really incredible.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this one.
I don't know what happened today in that conversation with Bernardo, but I had a great time. We didn't even get to talk about AI.
We didn't get to talk about AI. We didn't get to talk about aliens.
Also, I didn't get to say, this book is what?
Okay, tell us a little bit about the book. I haven't read it.
The book is called The Daimon, Daimon, and the Soul of the West. So a daimon is, hold on, I need to look this up so that I say it correctly what a daimon is. It's not a demon. A daimon is a term from ancient Greek mythology. Shout out to Brian Murarescu. It refers to a lesser deity or guiding spirit. It's not necessarily bad or good. It's kind of this neutral force.
What's it lesser than?
When things go south in our lives, we are prone to blaming mere circumstances or contingencies for the reemergence of the ever-present primordial lack in the field of our attention. We're very good at conjuring up eminently reasonable causes for what's always with us as part of us. We blame the economy, the boss, the partner, the weather, the neighbor, the death of the father, but it hardly ever occurs to us that the lack we feel wasn't caused. Instead, it has always been present. Sometimes more visibly, sometimes less so, but always there as an intrinsic part of us. We're simply put together this way, archetypally. Archetypally? I don't know how to pronounce that. And the Western life is surfed atop a forever rolling wave of primordial lack. Paradoxically, this wave is what sustains and propels us forward. For in a state of total contentment, we wouldn't care to lift an arm or achieve anything. Life would lose its impetus, its drive, and grind to a frozen halt. So, I mean, that's just a little taste. That's just on page 37. He had a moment. His father died when he was 12, and it was devastating, as it is for young children. And in particular, he was an only child of his parents. And he literally heard a voice one day. He said it was his voice, but not my usual tone. And it said, the boy really is desperate now. And he remembered being like, who's this? What's happening? And he realized in that moment, there was an observer of his experience. Now, we are taught to do this in meditation. We're taught to do this even as a philosophical concept. But as a child, it literally dropped in. It dropped in like that there was an observer and he was tapping into it. And this became his life's experience. This is why it reminded me of Peter Kingsley, the Book of Life. He was able to interface, and that's how he's lived his life. He went into computers and tech, and that was his world. And he had this complete change of life where he realized, I am a philosopher. There's a poem in here, a very long poem that just dropped into his brain. This would happen to Peter Kingsley. He would hear messages and things from other realms that just dropped in like that. What was already obvious to others suddenly became obvious to me too. I had no control over life, had never had, and would never have. At best, I could nudge it in certain directions, but certainly not take the reins of its course. All the adaptive mechanisms I had constructed to deal with loss, useful as they had been, had a fatal flaw. They deceived me into the illusion that I could amass enough power in life to prevent the rug from being pulled from under my feet again.
There's too much actually to dive into. There's so many little sub pockets that we can talk about. I love how this conversation dovetailed to so many of our other episodes, from consciousness to very practical things about the mind-body connection and what we're learning about medicine and how medicine is changing in order to incorporate a much more holistic perspective of the body.
Really, really hope that we can continue this conversation. And in case you're not subscribed to Substack, make sure that you are, because I think that this is going to be the topic of a lot of conversation over there that we'd love to continue to get into with you.
Check out Mayim Bialik's breakdown on Substack. We release exclusive content not available anywhere else, and it's a growing breaker community that is there. Can't wait to see you over there.
From our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break down